The video critique the telepathy tapes didn't want you to see. Exploring facilitator cueing in no-touch forms of facilitated communication. Welcome to another video critique of facilitated communication.
Why is it that most of the time, most of the autistic individuals are not looking at the keyboard?
Observations from a former facilitator. What follows are my observations as a former facilitator who participated in reliably controlled testing in 1993 to determine authorship in FCed-generated messages that contained allegations of abuse against my student's family. For those of you familiar with my story, I've placed timestamps in the description box of this video so you can skip around. The testing showed that I, not my student, authored the FC-generated messages, even though I, like all practicing facilitators, thought I was simply providing physical and emotional support so she could communicate her thoughts independently. I was devastated by the results. After the testing, I learned some key information about FC that I had not been given access to in the workshop I took. Information workshop leaders didn't tell us. FC was not then, and is not now, an evidence-based technique. Anecdotes and testimonials, aka feel-good miracle stories, are not evidence, though facilitators may sincerely believe in the technique. Reliably controlled tests consistently show that the FC-generated responses are only correct when the facilitators have access to the test stimuli. Question: if the communications are independent, why does the facilitator have to know the answers for it to quote-unquote work? When facilitators are blinded from test stimuli, the FC-generated responses are either incorrect, the clients can't spell, unintelligible, the clients don't have letter sound recognition, or correctly spelled with words that have nothing to do with the questions being asked. In other words, facilitator guesses. Most facilitators are unaware of the extent to which they use physical, visual, and/or auditory cues to influence and control letter selection. Well-intentioned people can be fooled by FC. For more information about FC, please visit facilitatedcommunication.org or my FC is Not Science YouTube channel. I stopped using FC after the testing, but have continued studying it over the past 30-plus years as a skeptic with a particular interest in facilitator behaviors. In today's video, we'll briefly discuss a copyright strike made by the telepathy tapes on my YouTube channel, FC is Not Science, and what happened. Look at the characteristics of touch-based and no-touch forms of facilitated communication. Discuss the characteristics of and purpose for reliably controlled testing, both for FC and for telepathy. Analyze a video from the Telepathy Tapes podcast for facilitator behaviors that likely contribute to facilitator cueing and control over letter selection. Introduction to the Telepathy Tapes and FC. The Telepathy Tapes podcast is currently drawing a lot of attention in the United States for its claims that non-speaking individuals with autism have telepathic abilities. The presenter of the podcast, Kai Dickens, and the experts featured in the podcast, however, downplay the fact that the autistic individuals featured in the podcast are being subjected to a discredited technique known as facilitated communication. Proponents of FC have yet to provide reliably controlled evidence that the technique leads to communication independence for the individuals being subjected to its use. In fact, the evidence shows that facilitators are often inadvertently controlling letter selection. To date, facilitator authorship and FC-generated messages have only been ruled in, not ruled out, when tests have been conducted under reliably controlled conditions that blind facilitators from test stimuli. In the telepathy tapes, the participants, not the facilitators, are denied access to the pictures, words, and numbers being spelled out using FC. In each test, the facilitators knew the answers to the spelled responses. Copyright strike on YouTube. What happened? I posted a video critique on YouTube called No Touch Queuing and Rapid Prompting Method Facilitated Communication. The Telepathy tapes filed a copyright strike against the video. YouTube took the video down, pending review. I, through my lawyer, filed a counter-complaint, arguing the video was not in violation of copyright and was within the bounds of fair use. The telepathy tapes failed to take legal action within 10 days, so YouTube restored the video and revoked the strike against my channel. Note about copyright and fair use. This video is not to be construed as legal advice for copyright and fair use. I sought legal advice from a lawyer who specializes in these issues. Questions of copyright and fair use are, as I understand it, decided on a case-by-case basis and meet certain criteria. The bottom line in the case I'm talking about today is that criticisms of an extraordinary claim like the telepathic abilities in non-speaking individuals with autism fall within fair use, as does critiquing the video for facilitator behaviors likely to influence and control letter selection. Should the telepathy tests be critiqued? Proponent view. No, it's an insult to non-speaking individuals to question their abilities. Individuals' telepathic abilities are disrupted in the presence of doubters or negative energy. Criticisms of SC, S2C, and RPM or telepathy shows a bias against people with disabilities. Skeptic view. The telepathy tapes people are making an extraordinary claim that should be tested under reliably controlled conditions. The videos provided behind a paywall clearly show evidence of facilitator influence over letter selection via physical, auditory, and/or visual cues and should be discussed as part of the scientific process. For those of you unfamiliar with the topic of FC, I'll briefly review the two main categories for the technique. Again, timestamps are in the description box below for those of you who'd like to skip around. Two main categories of facilitated communication. Touch-based FC. The facilitator supports the client by holding onto a wrist, forearm, elbow, shoulder, or other body part during letter selection. FC is also known as supported typing, saved by typing, assisted typing, hand over hand, letterboarding, and others. Minimal or no touch FC. The facilitator holds a letterboard or stencil in the air while the child extends a finger toward it. It's also known as rapid prompting method, spelling to communicate, speller's method, informative pointing, spelling with eyes, and others. In today's video critique, the facilitator uses a no-touch form of FC. This is a rare instance in which the person being facilitated holds the letterboard. The facilitator and podcast host refer to this style of FC as quote-unquote supported typing and/or rapid prompting method. Facilitator role in no-touch forms of FC. Proponent view. Communication difficulties in autistic individuals are primarily due to motor difficulties and require their support. Cueing cannot occur if the facilitator holds the letterboard in the air. There is a mind-to-mind bond between facilitator and child. Skeptic view. Many autistic individuals perform gross and fine motor activities independently and without facilitator interference, so why can't they select letters on a keyboard by themselves? Facilitators, however unwittingly, can cue their clients even when the board is being held in the air with minimal physical touch. FC conversations are one-sided and facilitator-controlled. Does FC work? Does telepathy exist? Proponent view. FC works because people using FC say it works. Telepathy works because facilitators and parents feel like it works. Skeptic view. All reliably controlled tests of authorship demonstrate that the facilitator, not the individual being subjected to FC, are controlling the messages. Telepathy testing in FC cannot be determined until authorship is established. Proving telepathic abilities in individuals being subjected to FC. Although the Telepathy Tapes podcast has revitalized and popularized the belief that non-speaking individuals with autism are telepathic, the idea is not new. From its inception, some FC proponents have always believed that FC works through telepathy. The following quote is from Master Trainer Marilyn Chadwick. Chadwick was at the time Assistant Director for the Facilitated Communication Institute, now called the ICI, at Syracuse University. FC begins with a psychical communication. Facilitated communication begins with a psychical communication, pointing at letters, words, or typing. The hope is the person will move to more advanced forms of communication without an aid or prop. Note, I was unable to find any formal protocols within the FC literature that address fading support, completely weaning the individuals from the need to have their facilitators within visual and auditory range during letter selection, even after years of practice. Does FC begin with psychical communication? Proponent view. Yes, non-speaking individuals with autism are imbued with psychic abilities that are gifts from God, and spelling is their way of transferring that knowledge to neurotypical people, aka facilitators, who are not as evolved as they are. Skeptic view. Unclear. Before psychic abilities can be assessed, authorship must be established first. To date, there is no scientific evidence that FC is an independent form of communication. Reliably controlled testing shows that facilitators, not their clients, control letter selection. To prove telepathic abilities in individuals being subjected to FC, S2C, and RPM, researchers would first need to establish that the FC-generated messages attributed to the individual with autism reflect their own thoughts and not those of the facilitator. The non-speaking individual with autism has the language and literacy skills to comprehend the words being spelled on his or her behalf. These skills need to be taught and are not innate or learned through osmosis. The individual receives the telepathic information and types it independently without external cues provided by the facilitator. These cues include, but are not limited to, vocalizations, body movements, hand gestures, and/or physical touch. How cueing is viewed by proponents and critics. Proponent view. To provide support and comfort to the individual. If the facilitator isn't touching the individual for S2C and RPM style FC, the communications are independent. Skeptic view. Facilitators can and do cue their clients in three main ways: physical, visual, and auditory, or verbal. Cueing can occur in no-touch forms of FC. Facilitators are often unaware of the extent to which their own behaviors influence and control letter selection. Communications aren't independent if the facilitator must be within visual and auditory range for FC to work. A telepathy test. In the following clip from the telepathy tapes, the facilitator is shown a randomly generated picture she thinks represents paint splatters. She then asks her son, "What is it?"
What is that? What do you see, Akhil?
P. P. Wait a minute. A. I. N. T. Masha.
Does he telepathically spell out the word paint? Proponent view. Yes, he didn't see the word. How else would he know what his mother was thinking, except through telepathy? Skeptic view. Doubtful. If we look closely at the facilitator's behaviors, there may be a more down-to-earth explanation for why her son could spell a word he hadn't seen, but his mother, the facilitator, had. Facilitator behaviors. The cues facilitators use during FC fall within three main categories: physical, auditory, and visual. These cues influence or control letter selection whether the facilitators are consciously aware of them or not. While the facilitator does not appear to use auditory cues or physical touch in the clip I just showed you, she uses hand signals and body movements, visual cues, that appear to be synchronized with her son's hand movements. Did you notice the facilitator's hand gestures and body movements? Most people look at the keyboard and miss the facilitator's cues. Let's look again, more closely. Facilitator behaviors: constant eye contact with the letterboard. One hallmark of FC is that the facilitator maintains constant eye contact with the letterboard. Here's the same clip, but with annotation to draw attention to the facilitator's eye contact with her son's iPad. Why do facilitators look at the letterboard? Proponent view. To help their clients regulate their bodies and to stop them from perseverating on specific letters and or to prevent them from making mistakes. Skeptic view. If the communications are independent, why is it necessary for facilitators to constantly look at the board? What would happen to the client's ability to spell correctly if the facilitator was not able to see the letterboard? Facilitator behaviors, hand gestures, and body movements. Using the same clip, I've zoomed in on the facilitator to draw attention to her hand and body movements. Watch how she moves her hand during letter selection. She also moves her body back towards the wall and or forward towards the letterboard. Notice that her movements are always within her son's peripheral vision. Peripheral vision is designed to pick up broad gestures such as these. I've edited out the audio and added a mask to focus your attention on the facilitator's behaviors. Why does she move around so much during letter selection? Proponent view. Did they even notice? Skeptic view. The facilitator's hand movements appear to be synchronized with her son's hand movements, something that comes from many hours of practice. What would happen to her son's ability to spell correctly if she was out of visual range during letter selection? Facilitator behaviors, synchronized movements. Using the same clip without audio, I've zoomed in and slowed it down to show the facilitator's hand movements in conjunction with her son's hand movements. Leave a comment below if you think the movements appear synchronized. If the communications are independent, why do the son's hand movements mimic those of his facilitators? Did he telepathically spell paint? Proponent view. Yes, he and his mother have a mind-to-mind bond that allowed him to know the word she was thinking and spell it out independently. Skeptic view. Doubtful. The facilitator knew the target word and how to spell it. The facilitator used hand movements that appeared to signal to her son which letters to select on the letterboard. How accurate would letter selection be if the facilitator was not allowed to speak or move her body during the activity? Summary. Today, we revisited a video critique from the telepathy tapes that they didn't want you to see. They put a copyright strike on the original critique I did, but when I, through my lawyer, filed a counterclaim arguing fair use, they chose not to respond. YouTube restored the original video and removed the copyright strike from my channel. The bottom line is that under fair use, I am, and you are, allowed to critique their claims that non-speaking autistic individuals subjected to a discredited technique have telepathic abilities. Testing extraordinary claims under reliably controlled condition is part of the scientific process. I understand that FC can look convincing at times, especially when it appears the facilitators aren't physically touching their clients. However, facilitators can, and do, cue their clients using auditory and visual cues to aid in letter selection, even when the observers don't pick up on it. That's why reliably controlled testing is so important. As long as facilitators are providing physical, visual, and/or auditory cues to their clients, however inadvertently, the FC-generated messages cannot be considered independently representing the thoughts of those being subjected to it, nor are they telepathic. Data sources and research to support claims being made by proponents and skeptics. Proponent view. Anecdotes from parents and educators. No reliably controlled studies are available to prove proponent claims of communication independence with FC or telepathic abilities in autistic individuals. Skeptic view. Reliably controlled studies designed to rule in or rule out facilitator influence over letter selection. Periodic systematic reviews over the past 30-plus years reveal no new evidence to support facilitator claims of communication independence. For more information about FC, including critiques of pro-FC articles, books, and movies, facilitator-controlled authorship studies, systematic reviews, opposition statements, FC and the legal system, false allegations of abuse, facilitator crimes, please visit facilitatedcommunication.org. Thank you for watching until the very end. Please post your comments and questions below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue to grow this channel. And remember, FC is not science.